everyone. Thanks for joining us for the Superintendent's Report. I'm Carol Birdsong, and I'm going to be talking to Jason Golden. This is our first Superintendent's Report for the year of 2024, and we're going to talk about all things Williamson County Schools. First of all, as we record this, it is Tuesday, January 23rd. I don't know about you, but I've gotten my days all confused because of the snow days that we have had over the past week.
Well, when you mentioned it was the first one of the year, I haven't even thought about it that way because I think about school years. It's ongoing. Like our year is really July 1. But our students, as we record this, had been out for about a week. After Martin Luther King Day, Middle Tennessee had one of the biggest snowstorms I think we've had in decades.
Oh,
I've heard varied comparisons, maybe even dating back to the 1960s, depending on which report you hear. But in any event, we had heavy snow and we were unable to run our buses for a number of days. Today, as we sit here, was the first day we've been back, and we're glad to be back.
Yes, I know. People enjoy their snow days, but I think about day 5, they don't enjoy them anymore.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
And you know, I've had a handful of conversations with community members. We're in an area here in Middle Tennessee where a lot of people are moving in, and folks move from different areas of the country, people from Florida, people from Minnesota, and everywhere in between. And what I often hear from folks who lived up north, why can't you just run your buses? And really the key difference is county governments, city governments, state governments don't invest in the massive amount of equipment and staffing it takes to remove that snow quickly. It's because it happens so rarely. And it, in essence, isn't a wise use of tax money for them to do that because it's used so rarely. So as a result, we have to plan for windows of time where ice makes it impossible for us to get around. Another element of that is sometimes in some other regions you might get snow that stays as snow and stays quite dry, but for us you end up with a snow that quickly turns into ice, and if it freezes overnight we have quite impassable roads.
Well, we had the snow, but then we had it coupled with the really the temperatures that were frigid.
That's right, yeah. Temperatures in single digits. So as a result, we planned for these days, and we actually have 10 days built into our calendar. We go to school, in essence, over the course of a school year, 10 days longer than the state standard for school. And by doing that, we stockpile some days by going a few extra minutes every day. As we sit here today, we have used 5 of our 10 snow days. So we're actually in pretty good shape right now.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about what goes into closing school for a snow day, because there's a lot of angst that happens, and it seems like we got fortunate, I think, with this one at first because we knew the snow was coming in. All the meteorologists were predicting it. We were already out for Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and so that helped us out. I think, in being able to make the decision. Everybody kind of knew it was coming and that sort of thing. As the days progressed, I would say that the anxiety levels amongst our team increased.
Well, we know that we have to be prepared, and we have a pretty good team that prepares. This was a bit unusual this time in that even at our Thursday night work session before the snow was projected on Monday, I told our board that there was a chance that we were going to have to be out because the meteorologists predicted this, and they were right. And so they did a really good job at the National Weather Service, at the local news level, of telling us this was coming. So we were able to give everyone that heads up. Hey, we expect come Monday we may have to close school. So that part of it was relatively simple. We did have that 3-day weekend. So that snow came Sunday evening, and within maybe 30 minutes of it starting, the roads became impassable. It was pretty massive even on Sunday night. So we met on Monday, and the electronic meetings, Zoom meetings, et cetera, it's a real advantage. Teams, whatever method you use, and we determined that it was so substantial that we knew at least a couple of days we were going to be out, depending on what happened with weather. So we made that decision for 2 days. Right then on Monday, we knew Tuesday and Wednesday we were going to be out. And then we started sending spotters out, trying to see what kind of progress county government made on the roads, what progress the cities made within city limits, and we kept an eye on it. We have spotters from our safety department, from our transportation department that go around to typically our usual suspect roads. We know some roads that typically have problems. This time it was so extensive. We made sure that we were thoughtful and planned. One big issue that we really worked on is our child care programs. When we have inclement days, we do have inclement weather sites for our child care programs. If we can have a clear campus where we can have children safe, we want to provide that service to our parents. A lot of our parents are first responders, nurses, doctors, those who are actually out there and have to work during these times. So we try to keep those sites open if we possibly can. We had a short window of time in the middle of these events where we were able to open that for a little while. We have 42,000 students. We had about 100 families take advantage of that during that one day where we could do that. Those who were able to do that were appreciative, but the issues were extensive. It gets a little more complicated when the melt comes because our buses have to travel over virtually all of those 700 miles or so of roads in our county, and we need to make sure all our buses are safe. So often somebody's neighborhood will be perfectly clear. They can drive to work and there's no problem. But a mile away or another part of the county, there's another neighborhood where a bus goes where it's just impossible and it's unsafe for a bus. So we have to evaluate that. When we finally made a decision to return to school today, we did a 2-hour delay because we did see a lot of melt yesterday, but we knew there were still some spots. We wanted to make sure that our bus drivers were able to see the roads in the daytime. Our buses typically start running at about 6 a.m. for a 7:50 start, and that's dark. And so we did do that 2-hour delay to make sure that those icy spots were visible before somebody touched them.
Okay, very good. So I did get the question over break about why don't you utilize those Chromebooks and do virtual school. So will you talk about the state law that governs that, please?
Well, there's actually a state law that allows us to have up to 2 virtual days per semester. That's our choice, but they have added we must provide food service through the USDA program, and we must provide services to our students with disabilities. What that effectively means is we need to either get people to our students or get our students to our buildings for us to provide that. If we could run the buses to be able to provide those services, we'd have school. So it's really almost a practical impossibility for us to do virtual school under the standards that we have. It's 2 days. What I do know is that those virtual days might be possible when we actually have some clear roads and we could actually provide those services. So theoretically, if we run out of snow days, if we run out of those 10 inclement days, there might be some viability in certain situations to use those 2 days, but it can't be a first choice when we're talking about snow and ice packing in everywhere.
Okay. Well, we've utilized, no, we have not utilized them. We have used 5 of our 10 snow days that we have built into the calendar already. But we are going to, parents, we need for you to, parents, families, mark your calendars because we are going to be using another snow day on Super Tuesday, March the 5th. So that will bring us to our 6th snow day. We'll be releasing that information through InFocus. We'll have it posted everywhere. I'm sure your schools will be communicating that. But Superintendent Golden talked to us about why you have asked the state to be able to do that.
So Carol, you made me smile when you said utilize and use. You know, we're an education institution, and basically, as I understand it from our English teachers, the difference between use and utilize is using something for for an unintended purpose. It's just a way to use something for which it wasn't designed. And when we talk about March 5th, using a snow day for March 5th, I think utilize is the perfect word. We plan to utilize March 5th as one of our 10 stockpiled snow days because it is Super Tuesday and Election Day. We have a committee that makes decisions on setting up our calendar usually about a year ahead of time. when our calendar committee planned for this school year, they consulted with the election office here in Williamson County. We asked about some of those scheduled dates, and basically it looked like it was going to be pretty reasonable and pretty feasible for us to have school on that election day. Since then, they've experienced a more recent election where the turnout was a lot larger than typical. Also, the election office intends to use either 19 or 21, they haven't quite decided, of our school sites for polling places. Because they anticipate a much larger turnout this time, we decided the appropriate thing to do to make sure our students were off those campuses when there was going to be a high volume at so many of our campuses, that we try to not have school that day. So we had to get permission, authorization from the Commissioner of Education for us to do that. We sent a request in. The commissioner was good enough to recognize that it was a potential safety issue for our students with so many people on our campuses in our buildings while our students are there, that she authorized us to use one of those days for the elections. So March 5th, we will not have school. From a structural standpoint, we've already got the systems in place to treat that as an inclement weather day. We have protocols in place for our staff, for our families. I think it's by far the right thing to do, and it might encourage a little bit better turnout even, because people will have that freedom to go vote. I know a lot of employers do a really good job for their staff, either giving them time before or after the day, and I encourage folks to check out where your polling place is. Likely it's at one of our schools. We'd love for you to vote on March 5th.
Okay, March 5th. We will have SAC open at some specific sites, and I'm sure those folks will be communicating that as well as we will. Let's talk about early release, because we did cancel our January 24th early release day, simply because, well, you tell us why we did it.
So we have a structure for our secondary schools, our middle schools and high schools, where we do a late start. We also do that, and we're actually in our second year of that for elementary schools, where we do an early release at strategically placed days in the calendar. The purpose of those early release times are for our teachers to get together and compare how their students are doing to their peer students from those other teachers in mastering the standards. We have strategically timed common formative assessments, where there's some small assessments where we evaluate students' mastery of standards at each particular grade level within each class. And then teachers adjust their instruction based on what those students show about their mastery of the standards. It's really one of the reasons we've been able to grow our high-performing students. The teachers get together, they compare notes on how they taught a particular content, they compare how their students did, they learn from each other on the fly. We have compared that from time to time on the difference between a doctor's visit and an autopsy with schools. We don't wait until the final state testing at the end of the year to make adjustments. We make adjustments based on what our students are mastering through the course of the school year. Again, those days are strategically placed to be set so that teachers have that assessment there and they can make changes right then. Because we were out for a week, it didn't make sense for us to have that day 2 days after the students return from a week off for snow, because the teachers are adjusting their pacing as they're teaching the content areas to their students. So because of that, because parents had been dealing with students being out for the week, it just made instructional sense for us just not to have that early release day tomorrow as we record this. Okay.
Very good. So let's talk about action that the board has taken. They have approved they annually approve our opened and closed zone schools. So that is for the next school year, the 24-25 school year. That action has been taken. That list is posted on the website, on our website at www.wcs.edu on the school zones page. So you can go take a look. And then we have to have it posted for 2 weeks. And then on February 6th, that's when the window to apply opens. And then the deadline for that is April the 15th. Talk about how the process of establishing open and closed zone schools takes place.
For years, we've had a structure where if we have room in a particular school, we will open zone it so families can send their children to those particular schools. We've been in a high growth area for decades, but because there's not even growth across the county, some years there's some additional space at one school. And we actually did it for years, hoping that some folks would choose that to keep us from having to rezone so quickly. A few years ago, the state actually institutionalized that with a law. And we saw some of our policy language incorporated into the state law related to open zones. They added some to it. And so now there's a structure where every year we're required to identify the number of seats that we have available at each school and give a window of time for folks to choose it. Again, we've done it for years ourselves. So annually the board votes on those open zone schools. We do have some basic standards. We project out our growth. We make sure that over the course of time for a school that we don't fill so many seats that the students who live in that zone are overcrowded, if we could avoid it. We also factor in some of the other choice that we have for students to attend for college and career technical programs, for the International Baccalaureate program at Franklin High School, et cetera. Another big issue is if a school site is under construction, we're not going to open zone because we're putting an extra burden on the campus while construction is going on. We have maybe about 50 to 60% of our schools that have some open zone space, something like that. For those of you who are thinking about your child attending out of zone for whatever reason, we encourage you to look at our list. We have it posted. Our window of time starts on February 6th to submit an open zone request. The window closes on April 15th. It's tax day, so for whatever reason, that's a good way to remember it. We actually structure it for April 15th so that we can get our planning in place and do our budgeting for how many teachers at each particular school, et cetera. If more students than how many seats are available apply, we now have a structure for what the state describes as a lottery. So for example, if we have 100 available seats and 102 people apply for that, it's not first come, first serve. It is a lottery system, and we will make a decision after that April 15th deadline on who actually gets the open zone seats.
Okay. And families, when you do apply to attend, you must provide your own transportation to those schools if you go out of zone. Also, we need to talk about the state legislature. It is back in session, and there are a couple of items that we have been talking about in Williamson County Schools. The first one of those, Superintendent Golden, I'd like for you to discuss, is the third grade retention law.
Well, thank you, Carol. Annually, our board meets with our state legislative delegation. Most all of our state representatives and senators came a few Saturdays ago, earlier this month, and met with our board. We talked about a number of pieces of legislation, heard from them about their plans for this year's legislative session, and we talked about a number of bills specifically. One key item that we're concerned about is what we've been calling the third grade retention law. And that's been in place for a couple of years, and it affects third graders and fourth graders. It's a bit of a misnomer when we call it the third grade retention law because it's really about third graders and fourth graders. A few years ago, the legislature set up a structure that if students in third grade and fourth grade don't show what's described as adequate growth in TCAP, the state test, ELA, English Language Arts portion in third grade, they can't advance to fourth grade unless they either do summer school or tutoring over the course of the year or both. For fourth grade, those students who were targeted based on their third grade TCAP can't advance to fifth grade unless they show adequate growth on the fourth grade TCAP ELA portion. We're facing that for the first time this year. Our current fourth graders who are affected by the law as third graders, many of them are now affected by the law as fourth graders. We have about 2,500 or so fourth graders. 134 of those students we know are at risk of this, that until they take their TCAP this spring, they're not going to know if they can advance to fifth grade. We think that's a bad plan because it's about one portion of one test when we know that each one of those students learns just a little bit differently. Many of them struggled early on with reading, but we're making progress through some interventions. And we know that for almost all of them, the best thing for them is to continue some intervention programs rather than simply say, you didn't do well enough on that test, you got to do fourth grade again. Because the standards change and grow each year. We've had a lot of success over the years with students who start their school career struggling with reading. Over the course of time, they are able to grow and advance, graduate, and do excellent in their work. We're concerned that if we retain them when it's not the right thing for them, given all of their circumstances, we may be doing them a disservice by the time they turn 18 or 19 and they're a junior, for example, in high school. So we had that discussion with our legislators. Right now, there's no particular legislation that's going to affect that, but our board members talk to our legislators about asking, is there some way to make a change to that law that prevents it from being an end-all be-all if they don't score a particular score on TCAP. Now the funny thing is, right now, we still haven't gotten a clear definition of what for sure will constitute adequate growth for our fourth graders. The Department of Education, Tennessee Department of Education, presented a formula in November to the State Board of Education for how they're going to measure that. And they did a statistical analysis based on projected growth from 3rd grade to 10th grade. And the formula actually has a divisor of 8 because they counted the number of grades up until a student reaches 10th grade for that divisor. It's quite complicated. It is about that one test score in ELA, and it only focuses on that 1 year. And for us, because we know our students and we know those individuals, for most of them it's not wise. And so there's a lot of proverbial finger crossing. I wonder how my child's going to do in TCAP. We believe that the most appropriate thing is to establish some mandatory interventions. The state did a really good job of setting up those interventions for 3rd grade. We have a summer school program for those young grades now, and that's been working well. That cutoff is our challenge, because we know, based on our professional experience, our teachers over the course of a child's career can actually grow them.
You know, we always say TCAP is a snapshot. It's like, you know, the click of the camera, if you will, as to a child's success. And a lot of times we like to celebrate it, but we also have to just remember it is a standardized test. But I want to go back to the formula, and it was presented, like you said, in November. It's not scheduled to be approved by the State Board of Education, I don't believe, until February. And then we have TCAP testing in April.
Well, that's right. The State Board of Education has 2 readings for that. February 15th is their schedule. They asked a lot of good questions before their first reading when they were having those discussions with Department of Education representatives. I don't know where they're ultimately going to land. But I also know that last year in 3rd grade in summer school, those 3rd graders had to show adequate growth for summer school, and the adequate growth measure was different from what's now being proposed for 4th grade TCAP. So parents were not able to make a fully informed decision when they made a decision for their 3rd grade children about summer school versus tutoring over the course of the year. Now some of them are facing a changed playing field with that. But even with all that, the reality is those students are going to take that 4th grade test measuring the 4th grade standards once. And if they don't show what that formula shows, statistically adequate growth, they've got to go through those 4th grade standards again. So theoretically, a student can show growth compared to 3rd grade, but they've got to go back and do the 4th grade standards that are different from the 3rd grade standards, that are different from the 5th grade standards for ELA. There's always a little bit of overlap in those standards, but for so many students, progressing with the continued interventions, that extra time, is a whole lot more valuable than you've got to repeat.
Correct me if I'm wrong, the teacher has no say-so in the student. It's really, truly this one TCAP snapshot.
Well, the power we have is to prepare students for the test. You know, the irony is you often hear at the highest levels of government, we test too much, we test too much. And now we have a high-stakes test at those younger grades. We know that the high-stakes test of ACT, SAT, AP courses for our high school students so that they get credit for particular courses, we've been dealing with high stakes tests at those older grades for years. Now we have a high stakes test for the youngest grades. And that's part of the concern too. It adds a stress level that actually creates another variable for those young students to take that. So our teachers do have that power to work on student mastery of standards. And we do an excellent job with that. I mentioned earlier when we were talking about those early release days, that's one of the things our teachers do. They identify deficits in our student mastery before the actual test comes. So we're working on that. Our numbers continue to shrink as our numbers of students who aren't proficient continues to shrink as they progress through their career. But this, again, and I've said it a couple of times, the withholding of the movement to the next grade is not right for the students who we know have many, many variables, many issues, rather than just one particular test. Occasionally we have retained students because the whole scope of where they are makes it the right thing to do. But for 134 in 1 year, even with our large numbers, we know for many of those students it's not going to be the best for them.
That's a teacher-parent decision, school decision.
And I will tell you, Carol, finally, we've got 134 students who don't know if they're going to be able to advance until that TCAP result comes.
Which doesn't come until end of school year, right?
Well, it'll be really close to the end of the school year because we are doing online testing now, and that's another variable that the state's been trying to address for years, get the test online so we get the results quicker. So we'll see. I don't want to say we've got 134 students who will be retained. We have 134 students who don't know until they take that one test.
Okay, thank you. Let's talk about another interesting issue, and that is vouchers that the state legislature is discussing, if you will. What does that mean? What does that mean for Williamson County schools?
It's hard to know right now what it means. The governor's plan that he verbalized, it's hard for me to speak for the governor. I encourage folks to look that up and find out exactly what he said because he did speak to it. The essence of his plan, as I understand it, which has not yet actually been presented as legislation, is that they will offer vouchers for 20,000 students this year and then offer vouchers to any student, any child in Tennessee in year 2 and beyond. The plan is for this year for the state to pay $7,075 towards non-public education. There's some detail that he shared that we haven't seen yet related to those 20,000. But again, for year 2, that has the potential to be anyone. I don't know how it's going to affect Williamson County schools directly because it will open up some choice. What I know is that we offer choice within the public schools. We talked about that with open zoning. We have a lot of programs for our students. I'm really proud of the work that we do, and we've had a lot of success with our students, and we've opened a lot of doors for our students. So how it might affect us with students deciding to leave at some point, I don't know. But what I do know is that on the money side, the state funds our students at somewhere less than $4,000 per student based on a new formula. On average, we're getting less than $4,000 per student. The state plan is to pay $7,075 for every student who doesn't go to public schools. So they're putting a substantial burden on local governments to try to fund us. And everyone knows, we always talk about it, teachers aren't paid very much for the professional work that they do. We've been talking about trying to create a livable professional income for our professional teachers in our community. It's an expensive community to live in compared to most of Tennessee. What I know is, in essence, the talk is we have a lot of money that we're not spending at the state level, and we want to increase our spending elsewhere and not fund other needs. Whether it's us or highway, et cetera, I can't speak to that. That's a state argument. Philosophically, I love public education. I know that in our nation, public education is what sets us apart from so many other nations. We create people in a way that public education does uniquely. And we do it comprehensively for everyone. We serve students with disabilities. We serve students no matter where they are. And so I'm proud of that work. the funding side is what I think our counties and our state may end up battling over, because it's so different from the structure they have for supporting the bulk of their students.
We continue to be told that Williamson County Schools is the economic driver for Williamson County. And already, correct me if I'm wrong, already our county government pays more per student, which is a little bit different than many counties, I would say, or most of the majority of the counties around. But our local folks are picking up the tab for our students.
The state has a funding formula that includes what they call a fiscal capacity indicator. And there's a lot of complexity that goes into that formula. It even includes per capita income. Now, our tax receipts are based on at the local level, are largely based on property tax and sales tax. And so we've got a little bit of variability with sales tax. You really never know what those numbers are annually. Property tax is a little bit more predictable. Williamson County's property tax rate is among the lowest in the state, somewhere around maybe the bottom 20 or so out of 95 counties. But our county government does fund about 2/3 of our per pupil expenditure. Somewhere around a third is funded by the state. So our county leaders have stepped up. Decades ago, they decided education was important, and they created that environment. We get less from the state than most because of that formula, and our county government has stepped up. Even with that, we are below the state average across the counties in per pupil expenditure. So yeah, it does impact us. When our teachers' income is lower than some of our large neighbors, it makes it tough to recruit. So all those factors come into it. It's quite complex. I don't know where we're headed with the vouchers, but I do know that there's been a lot of discussion already, even before the legislation has been dropped, about what this really means for the state long term.
Okay. Our time is up for now, but lots more to talk about with vouchers, with third grade retention, and we would certainly encourage everyone to pay attention to that. And so as we leave you in this month of January, we challenge you to stay informed and engaged as the legislative session continues. And we hope that you are a subscriber to our InFocus email newsletter. It will be coming out on Wednesday this week due to the snow day. So thank you, Superintendent Golden. We will be back in February.